So I've broken it down as we just saw. You can break it down into different areas, but my preface is that I got sick 8 years ago and was given 1 year and got lucky. So, and the other is that what applies to caregivers, I think we have to decide what is a caregiver. A caregiver might be a family member, and so that family member is stuck with you as a patient forever, depending on how well you do. But in my case, AML was a lifelong problem, and my wife, who has done videos for, you can see them on the Know AML website, she's a lifelong caregiver. Right now, her duties are not like they were when I was in bed for 10 months. So I've broken it down into these 4 categories. I think we can probably get through them because some of them we just went through. But I think the comment I have on the right-hand side was during a Zoom call, retiring oncologist mentioned that he had only heard of quality of life, and I only had heard of it in the last 2 or 3 years. Because he said generally before that, survival was the goal, not quality of life. So I think we can all be so grateful for the medical progress we've had in the last in my 7 or 8 years. So next slide. This is a problem, obviously, for caregivers, but it's the same thing in many ways for who they're supporting. What the heck happened to me? What is AML? It's what happened? Did I start feeling funny? Did I just get a blood test, or what happened? What the heck happened? So the next thing you need to know is, when I find out I've got something called AML, how do I find out the details of it? Am I going to live through this? How will it affect me? And, oh, by the way, is there a treatment for it? I remember when I was diagnosed with a blood cancer called AML, I was concerned that, quite often in this modern age, you can solve things with surgery. Can't solve blood cancer with surgery. So it's a mystery. So, as I said, and as we just heard, the information, there's so much out there. So it's a matter of how do you find it? And what is AML? You sure hope you get it from your doctor if you're lucky enough to have an AML specialist, which it turned out my second opinion was an AML specialist. So the caregiver's quality of life and the patient's, I think they're just tightly related. Now, if it's a caregiver that's a paid for caregiver and not a family member, I'm not that familiar with that situation. And if you've got AML and you're in, you're not an outpatient, that's a totally different story. I've never been an inpatient AML person. I was inpatient in my own home for 10 months in bed, but when I go in to get my chemo treatment, and when I see my doctor in New York, which I haven't for a long time, she's got 2 parts. She's got AML in-house, and she's got AML people that come in for treatment. So I don't know. I think it's a great idea what we're going to do on July 7th. We all voted on what's important. The isolation. I'm sitting here at a different age group than you folks, but what applies to seniors, it also applies to AML patients. I'm part of a telehealth group here in my little town, and the first of 7 steps toward end of life, bad things that happen. The first one is called isolation. So I want to get to that, but when you get this kind of illness, you're not sure what your friends or family are going to think about it. And this is the problem. What happens if you start at the top center? What's going to happen to me, and when? And it's really it's really a mystery, and it goes on for weeks or months till you figure out what the heck happened to you and what's going to happen with appointments and schedules. And so the caregiver, because a patient in my case, and I hear it in many cases, and I have a friend with a 16-year-old grandson who a year ago was diagnosed, and he's still being treated, can't go to school. So what is the burden of the caregiver? Well, over there at around 2 o'clock, you see appointments and schedules and finances and travel. These are the complexities of the first month, or it might be the first year, or the first 5 years. And then in our case, we have several phone apps that we use to interact with blood tests and calendars and schedules and appointments. They are a miracle. But how do you find them and how do you learn them? And in some cases, especially in clinical trials, you're supposed to report every day how you are, how you feel, what are your blood counts. And in my case, during my clinical trial, you get a lot of instructions. But right now in my hospital where I get treated, we have a nurse navigator, which is a saint for everybody. It happens to be a senior nurse, and that's all she does. And if you need a question answered, it's a miracle. So this I present as this is the workload for a caregiver. So I don't know, anybody have any comments or additions or corrections?
I guess you're going to come on to it maybe later, but the emotional burden also on the caregiver?
Yes, I have a slide for that, even though I don't feel like I'm an expert at it. If it's nothing on this one, this is the physical burden, and it's part of the emotional burden. Rather than calling it emotional burden, I call it the mental burden. I mean, it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And my wife is my caregiver. We've been married 50 years, and she did 3 videos on Know AML, and I think she sort of minimizes it when she said, I gave up my life, my calendar, and my schedule for him. So I don't know what the solution would be if you didn't have a spouse or a family member helping you. It's got to be pretty brutal, because without any question, the first month or 2, you're not thinking clearly at all. You're just wondering what the heck happened to you. So this is what you just asked about, Lizzie. So I got sick. I didn't know the severity of it. And for 2 months, I told my wife, well, don't bother anybody. Don't bother our family and friends with my little problem. And I think it started to weigh on her that she needed to share it. She needed people to support her. She didn't want to go through this by herself. I wasn't going through it by myself because I had her, but she didn't have anybody. So she finally convinced me that we're going to reach out. And I like to think now at my age, I've learned most about life in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. This is going to sound a little odd, but I didn't realize that our friends needed to know the severity of this thing. I didn't realize that they were concerned that much about me. You know, you go through life and you got friends and you got family. The question is, when we reached out and when I had my lowest time, when it was very not clear whether I was going to make it, I lost 45 pounds and I looked like that person you visit when, and many friends came. And we, it was sort of a goodbye visit. So you feel differently. So what I'm trying to say in this one, the caregiver needs the emotional, physical support, as much as the patient, or maybe even more, because they have the big burden. The patient's just trying to figure out, am I going to get through this? But the caregiver on the previous slides got a million things going on and needs support. So any comments on this one, Lizzie? What were you thinking?
Yeah, pretty much what you said. Just whatever the patient's going through, the caregiver is going through the same thing. So, and like you say, the patient has the caregiver to turn to, but the caregiver, who do they turn to? So, yeah.
Any other comments?
You have captured it so well. Yeah.
From a cancer care perspective, we are seeing so much caregiver burnout.
Yeah.
You know, people that are just completely burnt out from, you know, the appointments and the medication and really everything. And exactly like you're saying, they don't have anyone to turn to. And they also feel like, you know, from a psychosocial perspective, they have to be strong. They have to be, you know, the rock, or they can't really be emotional about the situation. Or so yeah, we're seeing a ton of burnout from caregivers right now.
Well, that to me, that's the elephant in the room here that I didn't notice, because as I say, I have a rock, and she hasn't burned out, and now she's gone back to her life. But I think that would probably be the question. The other caregivers that have burnout, what the heck? How do you substitute for them, or how do you support them? That's the question on this chart.
If I can chime in, it's actually something personal. I was injured last year, and I suffered a spinal cord injury. So I just got back after 7 months away, and I'm now looking at this from a whole new perspective. And my husband is my caregiver, and he most definitely has burnout. But how do you get them to admit it? And that's the problem that we're having, is he won't admit it. He thinks he can do it all. He can cover it all, but I can see it. I know he's getting overwhelmed. I know he's getting frustrated, and it's, you know, he thinks he can take care of everything, but I want him to go get help. He won't accept help from family. He tells everyone he can handle it all. So I don't want to hurt him by, continually saying that I think he's burning out. I just don't know how to get him to admit it.
Well, that's awfully tough to hear. I did one cancer roundtable. I don't like doing them, and I was sort of did it, and it was 8 cancer patients were supposed to be there, and I had just come out of my clinical trial, and I don't want to talk about boys and girls or men and women. Just want to tell you what happened. So I said, I don't want to go to this. I'm doing better. I don't want to go and look like the healthy person. Oh, no, come, you'll be last. You'll speak last. So there were 6 or 7 people. There were 3 women there that were not the cancer patients. And I'm like dumbstruck that they're talking about their husbands not acknowledging that they have cancer. That this isn't a burden that they want to put on their family. And I don't know if it's a man-woman thing, but boy, your comment about your husband is amazing.
Yeah, you don't see it coming. And then everyone steps up and tries to do the best that they can. But I think it's a combination of him seeing me and being hurt for what I'm going through. And he just kind of buries that. And he thinks if he does all the laundry and all the cleaning and all the cooking, and it'll help with the emotional support. But honestly, I don't care if he ever washes another towel. I just want him to understand what I'm going through. And he's seemed to have thrown everything into the practical things that he can do. But yeah, it's definitely a learning exercise because everyone handles it differently.
The word that I didn't have in my chart, and the last chart I don't have it, and I think it's the word of the day for me, is burnout. That opens a whole new thing for me. And of course that leads to whether you can afford professional caregivers or where you are in what country. And I remember my doctor said 6 or 7 years ago, you know, most countries with AML for seniors, they're not offered any treatment at all. So I hope that's changed. All right, next slide. These are little tips, and they're not complicated, but my wife speaks of hers on her video, and it's amazing how many people in the 8 years that she has sent this list over of things to have in your car, or depending on what's going on, the obvious things like phone chargers and medicine and things like that. So these are not emotional tips. These are practical tips. And we have, because of our EMS, our emergency services here, we have in our front hall, we have everything about both of us in terms of emergency medical and support. So emergency sheet, emergency card. I know some drug companies are working on emergency cards, and the whole idea of supporting a caregiver by giving her or him the chance to interact with as many people, family and friends as you can. I know that there are two things that are personal in my life that aren't on here. They're not really, shouldn't even be on here, but I think two things that are important to a patient are music and humor. And, you know, it's not gallows humor. It's just having the chance to live a normal life. The way my life goes right now is very simple. I'm on a fence. I do get chemo every month, so I'm reminded. I'm on a fence that is, do I have nothing when I feel good? And that's the best way to be. I have nothing. I'm not sick. And I can fall off the other side of the fence saying, oh boy, I'm really going to worry about, is this AML going to get worse or my treatment going to stop? And that's just care. That's not for the caregiver, but of course she worries about me too. That's pretty much what I see, trying to look over her shoulder and see what burdens she has. But as I said, quite often it's the same problems, patient and caregiver. Those three charts that I had up there. As I said, when in our senior care here, the first problem, the first sign of end of life, I don't want to call it progress, but it's isolation. So how do you, I wanted to be isolated. I didn't want to bother people. And my wife fought me on this thing. She said, no, they need to know. Things about patients, you know, why am I the only one? And that's not true. The world is, you know, we know that there are about 300,000 AML patients a year in the world. And then all you got to do is go to your waiting room, and you see in New York, there are literally 100 people in every waiting room, 6 big hospitals. So you're not alone, but you feel alone. And isolation and being felt that you're alone, that's, I think, what we want to work on and figure it out, because, you know, it's just human nature that if I have a friend who's got something, do I call him? Do I commiserate with him? Do I not do something? Do I do something wrong? These are the delicate things about human interaction. And I think it's very common on the upper left that patients withdraw because they've got the problem and they don't want to burden other people with it. So I think this is a major topic.